Hey good people, and welcome to my channel. As promised, this is an early release of episode 9 from the How I Would Have Rewritten Season 8 of Game of Thrones series. And as many of you already know, I've been having issues with my computer, but I'll have my computer up and running to edit videos starting next week. But for this week, I'll be making videos on my phone and improving the quality as things progress. So before we get things started, if you're new to my channel and you want to support my platform, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I value each and every subscriber here. So without further delay, let's find out what happened after the long night. Episode 9, which I've called The Spider and the Fly, begins at Riverrun. We learn that the losses to the Army of the Living were pretty huge. 97% of the wildlings and the Knights in the Vale were killed off. 21% of the Lannister army, 35% of the Golden Company, 27% of the Northern armies, 19% of the Riverland forces, and 5% of Dany's army, 2% of the Night's Watch, survived the long night. At Riverrun, the cleanup for the long night battle continues in the area. Archmaster Ebrose arrives and meets with Tyrion. Ebrose wants to know if Tyrion has the whereabouts of Sam, as well as the missing book from the Citadel. Tyrion replies that Sam died several months ago, but the missing book is at Riverrun. Tyrion also points out that the missing book had a key page missing that could have helped them fight the war. Ebrose replies that the secrets of Westeros have been guarded by the Order of Maesters for thousands of years. The missing page of the book merely explained that the White Walkers were always going to be a threat to humanity, and the only way to minimize their threat was to have peace talks with their king. Tyrion asks if the Night King even speaks the common tongue, to which Ebrose replies the Night King can definitely speak the common tongue, but his followers only speak a language that they only understand to White Walkers. Tyrion offers to give the book back to Ebrose, as well as offer to allow the Order of Maesters to stay at Casterly Rock until Old Town is rebuilt. Sansa arrives back at Riverrun with the Riverland civilians and meets up with Tyrion. Tyrion tells Sansa all about what happened during the long night and tells Sansa that Westeros will need a new ruler. He urges Sansa to consider leading the people of Westeros, and Sansa contemplates. Tyrion and Bran then leave Riverrun, with Tyrion going to Casterly Rock and Bran heading to Highgarden. Sansa meets up with Arya, Mira, and Bran to talk about the future of Westeros. Bran tells the group that Jon is currently over 1,000 miles away up north, and he will not pose a threat to the world of men for quite some time. In King's Landing, we see Dany and company arrive right outside the gates, and they see a city in ruin. Dany looks at the city with sheer joy, while her soldiers don't share her enthusiasm. As Dany walks towards the gates of a fallen city, Kinvara and the Lord of Light followers wish Dany much fortune in the future to come. Dany seems confused, but Kinvara shares that their purpose was simply to defeat the Night King. They must go back to Essos and tell their followers what happened. Kinvara then looks over to Dany's army and offers them passage to Essos if they so choose. We see a shot of Blackwater Bay, and there are several ships in the area. These are the same ships that brought the Red Women and the followers of Lord of the Light over to Westeros, and they were instructed to sail to King's Landing after the long night was over, and wait there until further instructions. We then see a flashback scene of Dany telling her Unsullied and Dothraki soldiers that they are free to follow her if they wish or leave as free men. The Unsullied and Dothraki make their way towards the ships in Blackwater Bay without hesitation. As Dany tries to chase her soldiers down, Kinvara tells her that they will leave a ship for Dany if she so chooses to leave King's Landing and goes elsewhere. Quaithe then approaches Dany and tells her that she finally is the Queen of Westeros, but if she ever wants to find Jon, she can find him beyond the wall. He will be there waiting for her. Dany then proceeds to walk through King's Landing, where there's plenty of snow on the ground. Dany manages to make her way to the Red Keep and notices that the roof of the building has been destroyed. She walks inside and sees that there's snow everywhere. This may look familiar because we as the audience are reminded of a vision that Dany had in Season 2 of her trip to King's Landing. Dany sits on the Iron Throne covered in snow, but quickly realizes that she needs to leave. Dany then decides to leave King's Landing, and she boards the one remaining ship in Blackwater Bay, asking the captain to sail to Dragonstone at once. Back at Riverrun, Hot Pie, who survived the long night, has a reunion with Arya, and she introduces him to Bran and Sansa. Hot Pie tells them that he's thinking about staying around because Riverrun is in short supply of people who can cook and fight. Once Hot Pie leaves, Bran tells Sansa, Arya, and Meera that he has to go to the God's Eye at once. They ask him why, and he replies that he can no longer see the future of Westeros, and he needs to understand some things. Arya and Meera agree to take Bran to the God's Eye, which is south of Harrenhal. At Dragonstone, Dany arrives on her ship, and she goes to check on the civilians that sailed there from White Harbor. But when she walks inside the castle, she sees no signs of life. She notices that there's absolutely nobody at Dragonstone, and she wonders how she could have gone from having the most powerful military and alliances in the world to having absolutely nothing. We then see her sitting on the throne at Dragonstone and thinking about how good Jon was to her before her turn to madness. At the God's Eye, we see Meera and Arya helping Bran onto a boat and rowing to the Isle of Faces. At the Isle of Faces, we see a network of weirwood trees. We also see 3 children of the forest come into view. The children of the forest tell Arya and Meera that they have been expecting Bran. Bran tells Arya and Meera that he must remain at the God's Eye for the rest of his days, and he bids them a goodbye. There is an emotional scene for Arya, but Meera understands why Bran must go. Once Arya and Meera leave, the children of the forest escort Bran into a cave on the island. Inside the cave, we see a system of roots from the weirwood trees. Bran taps into the network, and he's taken back to the past events of Westeros. We are taken back to the first Long Night battle. Just as Azor Ahai is about to strike down the Night King, the children of the forest intervene and prevent him from doing so. They tell Azor Ahai about the Night King's curse, and that is when they imprison the Night King, while knowing that he poses no threat to them until his powers regenerate. We see a scene at the God's Eye of the First Men, the Children of the Forest, and the Night King meeting to agree on terms for peace. The First Men and the Children of the Forest agree to no further acts of hostility, but the Night King wants a whole lot more than that. The First Men and the Children of the Forest propose that the Night King retreat to the far reaches of the north, where no humans inhabit the lands, where he will remain for the rest of his days. The Night King agrees to this on a few conditions. Because his curse compels him to kill, he will need human and animal sacrifices that will satisfy the curse, and that he can use to build his army and protect him against invaders of the lands. Failure to meet this agreement will result in the Night King creating another long night that will disturb much of the world. The First Men and the Children of the Forest agree to these conditions. As the Night King is making his way up north, the First Men are rounding up thousands of people who wish to remain free from following laws and rulers. Once rounded up, these folks are escorted to the far reaches of the north under the promise that they will be able to live out their lives as free folk. As those thousands of people are well into the icy regions of the north, we see a scene of Bran the Builder, as well as the Children of the Forest, mammoths, and giants building the wall. Now, the wall was built for 2 reasons. 1, to keep the Night King from being inclined to travel down south, and 2, to keep the Night King's sacrifices from escaping their eventual doom. Decades pass since the building of the wall, and as the free folk increase in population, stories of the others start to become popular within each tribe. When the free folk finally realize that these stories are actually true, some start to fight back while others try to escape. We see a scene of the wildlings climbing the wall for the first time, with some making it over and others falling to their deaths. The ones that made it over were eventually captured by the Northern Men and executed. Westeros knew that these executions would not deter other free folk from trying their luck, so this is when the Night's Watch was created. Not to guard the realms of men from White Walkers, but to honor the peace agreement between the Night Walker and the First Men. And for thousands of years, the Night King abided by this peace agreement until the terms were broken time and time again. First, when Sam killed the White Walker that was trying to take baby Sam, that was seen by the Night King as a provocation of war. Second, when Craster was killed, it disrupted the fresh supply of White Walkers that the Night King could create. Jon killing a White Walker at Hardhome also showed the world of men that they were ready to fight against the Night King. In the campaign for the Game of Thrones Suicide Squad to capture a live White, as well as Dany killing thousands of the Night King soldiers in Season 7, was the final straw. Bran then realizes that him traveling north to become the new Three-Eyed Raven was a journey meant for Bran to remain in that cave for the rest of his life. But when Bran gained access to the Weirwood Tree Network without the Three-Eyed Raven's knowledge, and the Night King left a mark on Bran, Bran then created a means of allowing the Night King to travel south of the Wall without the Night King having to use any other means. Bran then shifts his visions to focus on Varys. We learn that before the Battle of Winterfell, Varys was in constant communication with Illyrio and Qyburn about the happenings in the north and what their chances were of surviving the endgame. Varys knew that Westeros as he knew it was coming to an end, and the wars would eventually wipe out most of the remaining houses. So we learned that Varys was crafting a plan to not only save the common people of Westeros, but promote the right person to be the face of Westeros. That is when Varys gives Illyrio the go-ahead to get Young Griff to be the next leader of Westeros. And for those that don't know, Young Griff is the first son of Rhaegar Targaryen that everyone thought was dead. But in reality, he was in Pentos for the vast majority of his life, and he was raised under the strict guidance of Illyrio. Illyrio told Young Griff about the happenings of Westeros, and about the plan to align Viserys and Dany with the Dothraki, in hopes that they would pose a threat to the establishment within Westeros. Varys and Illyrio had no faith that Viserys would be the ruler, or the best ruler at that, but when they learned about Dany's resilience, they had their plans to put on hold for a few years. You see, Varys knew about the possibility of Tyrion being Dany's brother, and that was the driving force behind Varys freeing Tyrion from his cells the night before his execution, to ultimately take Tyrion to Meereen and introduce him to Dany as her brother and ally for the wars to come. But when Tyrion was able to gain favor with Dany on his own, Varys didn't see the need to bring up the news. When Dany came to Westeros, Varys and Illyrio knew that she was too strong for her adversaries. That is when Varys decided to leak information to Cersei through Qyburn so that the war wouldn't be so one-sided. We then see a flashback scene of Varys writing a letter to Yara and Theon after the Battle of Winterfell. The letter is promising them that the Iron Irons will be an independent kingdom free to steal and pillage if they shift their alliance to join him and Illyrio. Yara is immediately on board with this plan because nobody but Theon came to her rescue. Theon was initially hesitant to go along with the plan, but Yara reminds him that he is Ironborn and the Ironborn have to stick together. We learned that the northern civilians at Dragonstone were escorted to Pentos by some of the Iron Fleet, and when they arrived at Pentos, they were greeted by Young Griff. The civilians were ushered to a refugee camp where they were promised food, shelter, and safety by Young Griff. The civilians of King's Landing that chose to sail with the Ironborn also were taken to Pentos. Young Griff, who was a charismatic, compassionate, and convincing salesperson, brainwashes the citizens to make them believe that there are no other leaders in Westeros that have their interests at heart, and he would be the best ruler. The citizens slowly buy into his rhetoric. We see the King of Dorne arriving at Pentos, informing Illyrio that the Night King has attacked Dorne, but their alliance is still intact. The King of Dorne, being a distant relative of Young Griff, was told about the plan to install Young Griff as the ruler of Westeros, and he wanted to support this mission because it meant that Dorne would be kept in the fold. We see a scene from the Long Night in Essos. The sun has been blocked for quite some time, and it caused a great fear within the people at Pentos. The plan was for Young Griff to invade Westeros after the Long Night and be crowned king, with Varys serving as Hand of the King, much like Tywin did when he was Hand of the King. But with the possibility of Varys dying in Westeros, Illyrio had backup plans to assume the Hand of the King role for himself if things went south. During the Long Night, Illyrio traveled to Meereen to meet with Daario. At the meeting, Illyrio informs Daario that Dany has gone crazy. Her dragons are no longer a threat to anyone anymore, and she is in love with another man who happens to be her nephew. Illyrio proposes that Daario and the Second Sons join his alliance and leave Meereen, allowing the Masters to regain control of the slave cities. In exchange, the Masters have agreed to supply thousands of Unsullied troops and resources to their cause. Daario contemplates the offer but ultimately agrees to accept because the actions that he took throughout his story arc were primarily tied to his love for Dany, and he realized that his love was finally gone. Illyrio knew that he needed more manpower and resources to invade Westeros, so he enlists in the help of Xaro Xhoxos, who was able to escape his confinement in Season 2 via a trapdoor that was built within the safe. Since the events of Season 2, we learned that Xaro has been building his wealth in Qarth since we last saw him, and he wants to lend the mercenary group the Sorrowful Men to the cause. After the Long Night is over, Xaro and the King of Dorne travel to Braavos to visit the Iron Bank. They ask for money to help fund the army invading Westeros. They point out that Westeros no longer has a ruler, and Xaro brings the money needed to pay off Cersei's debt. Xaro and the King of Dorne tell the Iron Bank that they plan to bring slavery to parts of Westeros to pay the Iron Bank back with interest. The Iron Bank agrees to finance an army of 30,000 additional sellswords from the east to conquer any and all lands of Westeros. That army, along with Unsullied, Second Sons, the Sorrowful Men, the Ironborn, and Young Griff leading them all, will be what the future of Westeros is facing. We see a scene of Missandei arriving at Pentos after the events of the Long Night. She informs Illyrio that Dany executed Varys, and she has gone mad. She also shares valuable intel that Young Griff would need to invade Westeros. Illyrio vows to allow Missandei to stay in Pentos as long as she likes. We see a scene of Young Griff and his combined army invading Casterly Rock and taking the castle without much of a fight. The Lannister army is slaughtered, and Tyrion is taken prisoner without resistance. Grand Maester Ebros and the other maesters have no dog in the fight because they aren't beholden to any particular house. They just serve the realm. Young Griff puts Tyrion on trial for what the Lannister men did to his mother and sister, for helping destroy King's Landing, and for failing to protect Varys the same way Varys protected him on the eve of his own execution. Tyrion is found guilty and sentenced to death. We see a scene of Syrio Forel walking up to Arya and greeting her. Arya is in shock and thought Syrio was dead. Syrio then asks Arya what did she say to the god of death, and before Arya can respond, Syrio slits her throat. We learn that Syrio was Jaqen H'ghar the entire time, and he initially came to Westeros to recruit worthy people of becoming faceless men. Syrio escaped the fight with Sumerian Trant and learned that Arya was going to be traveling with the Night's Watch, so he allowed himself to get captured to see if Arya would save him when the time was right. Several seasons back, when Melisandre looked into Arya's eyes and learned about Arya's future, she foresaw her own death and warned Kinvara to avenge any transgression against the Lord of the Light. We see Kinvara in Braavos paying to have Arya assassinated. Jaqen asks Kinvara why assassinate a girl named Arya. Kinvara replies that Arya has been showing off her skills to a number of people, thus making her someone. Jaqen uses the knife he killed Arya with to take her face and assume her identity. We also see a scene involving Sansa. Sansa is at Riverrun and she's greeted by Young Griff after he's invaded Westeros. Young Griff makes a proposition to Sansa that they get married in exchange that he spares her life and the life of people of the North. Sansa refuses the marriage offer after having been forced into 2 previous marriages. Sansa is kept prisoner until a girl who looks very similar to Sansa is found and educated on the Stark history and ways of the North. This girl passes off as Sansa while the real Sansa is executed and buried in the Riverlands. Young Griff puts a hit out on Bran and orders his soldiers to find Bran dead or alive. Winterfell becomes the new capital of Westeros, and Young Griff plans to turn Winterfell into the largest city in Westeros once the winter is over. The northern civilians are allowed to return back to their homes, and allies of Young Griff's army are given lands throughout Westeros. Illyrio is right by his side as everything is taking place. The last vision Bran sees is one of Dany finally arriving beyond the wall at Castle Black. It's reminiscent of the vision that Dany had in Season 2, and she's greeted by White Walker Jon. White Walker Jon walks closer to Dany as she is in turn drawn to him. He puts his hand on her face and turns Dany into the Night Queen. As the Night Queen, Dany is capable of getting pregnant and producing endless amount of White Walker children. Something that the original White Walker didn't do because he swore that he wouldn't love another woman again after he was forced to kill his own wife. Bran then sees a scene from Season 1 of Game of Thrones, with Cersei saying that if you play the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die. Bran then realizes that with his powers, he can either accept the fate of Westeros or use his powers to fly back in time and alter the course of history, which may come at a cost. Bran finds the weirwood tree and wargs back into it. Bran sees a number of visions, but is ultimately taken back to the Battle of the Trident. During King Robert's Rebellion. This is because the death of Rhaegar Targaryen was the domino effect that caused the west of Westeros to ultimately fall. Bran's initial plan was to prevent Robert and Rhaegar from fighting one-on-one, but as Bran is transported back to the battle, his efforts to undo the history are unsuccessful. As Robert and Rhaegar begin their showdown, Bran yells the word "stop" as loud as he can. This causes Robert and Rhaegar to wonder where the voice came from. Then out of nowhere, an archer from the Targaryen army takes this opportunity to shoot Robert with an arrow to the neck, killing him instantly. Rhaegar, Ned, and other soldiers see this, and the fighting immediately stops. Rhaegar orders his troops to stand back, and Ned does the same. This begins the alternate timeline that Bran had hoped for. In this timeline, Rhaegar tells Ned the real reason he ran off with Lyanna, and how he plans to overthrow his father to become king. Ned is initially hesitant to believe Rhaegar, but decides to support Rhaegar's claim because it means being able to see Lyanna once again. So Rhaegar, Ned, and Tywin arrive at King's Landing under the guise that Tywin and Rhaegar are bringing Ned in as a prisoner. As the three men stand before the Mad King, Rhaegar informs the Mad King that his reign is over and he needs to step down. The Mad King is enraged and orders his king guards to kill Tywin, Rhaegar, and Ned. The Mad King also orders his alchemists to burn King's Landing. Jaime, who was still a Kingsguard at the time, kills the alchemist and joins in the fight in the throne room. The Mad King continues to scream, "Burn them all," to everyone that might be loyal to him. Jaime then reluctantly slays the Mad King. Jaime is distraught at what he had just done, but Rhaegar tells Jaime that he has forgiven him and absolves him of his Kingsguard duties. Ned and Tywin understand Jaime's actions and vow to overlook them. Rhaegar suggests that they tell the public that his father has committed suicide because that'll be what's best for the realm. Everyone is on board with the plan, and most importantly, Jaime doesn't get the title of Kingslayer. In this timeline, because Tywin didn't sack King's Landing, that means Elia Martell is alive as well as her children. But while in King's Landing, Rhaegar informs Elia that their marriage is over, and he will make sure that the children are well provided for. This news is upsetting to Elia, who leaves King's Landing with the children and returns back to Dorne. Tywin vows to keep quiet about the matter and ensure that his troops restore order to Westeros and protect King's Landing from an attack by Dorne. For Tywin's loyalty and for help taking the Iron Throne, Rhaegar agrees to make him Hand of the King again and arranges for Cersei to marry the next son of Rhaegar produces when he comes of age. We then see a scene at the Tower of Joy, with Rhaegar ordering Arthur Dayne to stand down as Rhaegar and Ned head to see Lyanna. Lyanna reassures Ned that she is in love with Rhaegar, and she gives birth to baby Jon, who is referred to as Aegon before she passes away. Over the remainder of the episode, we see a montage of how life in Westeros would be with Rhaegar as king and Aegon as his son living in King's Landing. Rhaegar's siblings Viserys and Dany would grow up in King's Landing, but Viserys would grow up feeling entitled to be next in line to become king. Viserys would grow up influencing Dany to feel the same way that he felt. During this timeline, Rhaegar becomes a follower of the Lord of the Light, and he encounters Melisandre, who becomes his advisor. She tells Rhaegar that she believes that he is the prince that was promised. Rhaegar buys into this plan, and he vows to treat the threat of White Walker seriously. Well, folks, this is the end of this episode. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section, and I'll be sure to reply to each and every comment. Also, my plan is to post the last episode of this series on Wednesday. So until next time, stay tuned and stay safe. Peace.